You red? I'm red. Oh my goodness.
Well, the long wait is finally over, and the latest entry in the Resident Evil series is here with Resident Evil 9 Requiem for a Dream. Prepare to escape death in a heart-stopping experience that will chill you to the core, playing as newcomer Grace Ashcroft, along with returning bad boy Leon Kennedy.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so obviously this thing's coming out soon if it hasn't already, and I was lucky enough to play it early thanks to a review code from Nvidia, sinking about 20 hours into it over the last week or so. And I guess the big question on everyone's lips is it any good? Well, I do think for the most part that Capcom have done a pretty good job here of injecting some more life into this decades-old franchise.
I think I want a second opinion.
I mean, credit where it's due, you'd think that after 30 years they'd be running out of ideas, but it seems they always find a way to bring this thing back from the brink and keep it going for another entry. So yeah, I do think it is good, just with a few caveats here and there. Mostly due to some questionable design decisions and a second half to its story which almost starts to feel like an entirely different experience. I will say up front as well that I am going to talk about a lot of those elements, but I'll do my best to keep spoilers to an absolute minimum. And I guarantee that despite what you might see in this video, I'm really only scratching the surface. So having said that, let's sharpen our hatchets, stretch out the hammies for some roundhouse kicks, dose up on green herbs and find out what the whole thing's about, shall we?
Would you like to see what's hidden under the hood?
Bingo.
But before we get too far into things, I do have to thank Nvidia and ASUS for sponsoring this video and talk about a few of the visual features here on offer. I mean, you've probably already noticed by now how good the whole thing looks, thanks again to that RE engine, which really is black magic in how well it performs. Powered by the ASUS ROG GeForce RTX50 series, explore Raccoon City with realistic path-traced effects and AI-powered Nvidia DLSS 4, using multi-frame generation for the ultimate Resident Evil experience. Nvidia Reflex is enabled when DLSS frame generation is turned on, reducing latency by up to 46%. Optimizing the graphics for ultimate responsiveness, better target acquisition, faster reaction times, and improved aim precision. Yeah, all important features in a game like this. Turning this feature on is pretty simple too. You go into the options menu and then the graphics image tab. Scroll down to share settings and turn it on under frame generation, and then enjoy silky smooth graphics without any slowdown. I'm always impressed with just how good these RE games look, with Requiem being no exception, and it also helps that with these kind of features, the whole thing runs as well as it does too. Even just all of the new path tracing stuff is really cool too, like when you randomly catch a glimpse of Grace's reflection in a mirror or window. So make sure to check out the new ASUS ROG GeForce RTX50 series today to take full advantage of all these cool new features. And once again, thanks to Nvidia and ASUS for sponsoring this video. Right, so Requiem takes place a couple of decades or so after the events in RE4, at a point when Umbrella as a company is pretty much finished. Raccoon City's been sealed off by the government, and new regulations, lawsuits, and crackdowns have destroyed the company, and prevented anything like it from ever happening again. So the world's moved on from that pandemic and tried to resume life as normal. Yeah, sounds familiar. We're playing as the brand new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft.
Grace Ashcroft.
Yes?
An FBI analyst whose mother, Alyssa, is one of the survivors from that original outbreak in 1998. And during the prologue, she's sent to the Wrenwood Hotel, where her mother was killed years ago, to investigate a new murder that's just happened there. With the victim also being another survivor of that original Raccoon City incident, and one in a long line of recent killings as well, suggesting some kind of pattern.
We found another body. One that exhibits the same pathology as the others we've been investigating.
So Grace heads on down there, bumping into a random person who's very obviously made up to look like Mr. X. Moving down this highly detailed city in glorious first-person mode. Where it's probably worth mentioning too that Capcom have finally gotten sick of hearing people bitch about being forced to play in first person. So they've finally given players the option to choose between either mode themselves. Meaning you can choose to play in either mode with both Leon and Grace, though by default it does recommend playing third person for Leon and first person for Grace. Anyway, after arriving at the hotel, she meets the only officer on duty posted there, because apparently someone thought that a 20-something-year-old and a single cop was enough security for an entire crime scene.
Hey, are you with me?
Oh, there might be answers inside.
Then after going in and mucking about for a little bit, she remembers back to the night of her mother's murder in a pretty brutal little flashback sequence. Before it then becoming pretty obvious that she's not in the hotel alone.
Who's there?
Soon being attacked by the officer from earlier, who's now turned into a zombie.
Get away! Get away from me!
And having to flee to another part of the hotel where she meets this mysterious new antagonist named Gideon.
It hasn't been easy.
Now, Gideon's a former Umbrella scientist who doesn't really say all that much outside of just some vague statements, before he knocks Grace out and takes her away.
Rest now, Grace.
Where at this point, it swaps over to Leon for the first of many times, which is admittedly pretty awesome. Seeing the dude returning and sporting that whole silver fox look with his hair and beard. Apparently he's also investigating the murders in the city and gets told that there's also something going on down at the hotel and that Gideon's a person of interest. So off he goes, driving away in a brand new looking Porsche.
Some of the address.
Turns out his timing is again impeccable because as soon as he gets there, he instantly spots Gideon carrying Grace off down the street.
You've got to be shitting me.
And then, like a complete idiot, he just gets out of his car, stands in the middle of the road and stares at the guy, where Gideon just turns around and easily spots him. And I'm not lying when I say that at first, I thought they'd have Gideon turn around and Leon would be gone. You know what I mean? Like maybe he'd be hiding and then there'd be some kind of cool little sequence where we had to tail the guy down the street and see where he was going. But instead, Leon just stands in the middle of the road, blocking traffic and staring at this guy like he's a deer in the headlights. As a result, Gideon then starts injecting people with a gun full of zombie juice, all to cause chaos and to try to slow Leon down, which it does, as everyone nearby starts turning and attacking civilians. Giving us, though, the first taste of actual gameplay, which is a pretty neat spectacle visually, reminding me a whole lot of Leon's opening chapter in Resident Evil 6.
Bad case of deja vu.
Either way, though, it doesn't last all that long because within minutes, he's lost Gideon. And what's the lesson we can learn from this, Leon? Hey, how about maybe don't stand around in the middle of the road staring at the person you're supposed to be tailing?
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Anyway, from this point on is really where we start to re-enter the world of survival horror. Jumping back to Grace as she wakes up in this medical center somewhere owned by Gideon. Quickly bringing back mechanics like ink ribbons and manual saving along with classic item boxes. And in fact, it is worth mentioning that Resident Evil 9 has two main difficulty modes. You got standard and classic, with standard being normal mode and just giving you constant checkpoints, whereas classic is more or less akin to hard mode, removing all of the checkpoints and making manual saves with ink ribbons the only way to not lose your progress, which I'd argue is the best way to experience things. Regardless of how you play it though, this next area serves as a bit of a tutorial for one of the main new enemy types in the game. This huge Lisa Garland from Temu looking monster, which is referred to in-game as the Girl. You get this creepy and clever little diegetic tutorial on how to avoid this thing through a children's book, and then shortly after that you get to see it face to face, literally. Then for this next sequence, it's hunting you throughout these hallways, being part Alien Isolation and part Amnesia the Bunker. Now, I say it's part Alien Isolation in the way that it seems to drop in from the ceiling vents like the Xenomorph did, and then I say Amnesia the Bunker because this thing is also allergic to light, making brightly lit rooms your only safe spots. Kind of. The thing is though, like, while it is reminiscent to how those games kind of work, it's also lacking a lot of the basic features that they had. Things like being able to hide in lockers or under beds. In fact, there's not even any kind of lean button either, so you just end up awkwardly crouching behind something and hoping this thing doesn't see you. It's not so much of an issue early on, but later on in the game during some of the ensuing encounters, you're really gonna wish you just had some of these basic mechanics. Or, you know, during any of the other segments where you're trying to sneak around and not get seen by the enemies. I mean, Capcom, it's 2026. Come on. The other thing worth noting is that this creature is very scripted and not quite as random or reactive as those other titles or even previous Resident Evil games. I mean, it always pops up in specific moments, and although running around when it's active is obviously going to attract it to your position, you can seemingly sprint as much as you want otherwise and make all kinds of noise because it doesn't seem to affect it. After you get through this bit, it then swaps back to Leon, again, as he also arrives at this medical center, which seems normal for all of 30 seconds before he's suddenly being attacked by more zombies. In a sequence that is supposed to be really awesome, I guess, where you take on this doctor zombie wielding a chainsaw. Only thing is, to use the chainsaw, you have to wait for it to stop spinning on the ground before you can grab it, or else it's gonna harm you. But then for some reason, that's a limitation that the zombies don't have to worry about, and they can just run up to it and grab it at any time. It makes sense.
Bullshit.
Finally though, after this second and short combat sequence is done, Leon finally meets up with Grace, and he gives her his magnum before the two part ways. For now.
Leon Kennedy, DSO.
CSO. I'm Grace. Ashcroft. FBI.
FBI.
The FBI? Yeah, this the FBI.
At which point the prologue is finally finished and we're into the actual story, playing as Grace.
I hope.
Which is who you're going to be playing as for the next 5 or 6 hours, just with the odd short sequence here and there where we get to play as Leon, when he comes back and completely tears ass. All this stuff as Grace, though, is the complete opposite, being proper survival horror. Especially early on here when you've got no weapons, barely any ammo, and you don't even really have the lay of the land. The goal here is to find 3 items so you can unlock the exit to the center and escape the building, but the means to do this requires exploring both the east and west wing, not to mention the basement beneath it, all of which is populated with zombies and other threats lurking around every corner. You walk into a room you probably shouldn't have, get attacked and overwhelmed, and you might even die a bunch of times. These are all positive features, by the way. And if you're playing on that classic difficulty, which you really should be, you've also got no checkpoints either, making exploration even more tense, knowing that your death could really set you back 15 or 20 minutes. And in fact, I think this might be the most on edge I've ever been in the entire series, outside of maybe Resident Evil 3 back when I was a teenager, or playing through Code Veronica, though that game was hard for all the wrong reasons. It's not helping either, given how insanely gruesome some of the death animations are here, which really linger on the moment, really emphasizing how Grace is meeting some kind of horrible demise. It's also probably the most survival horror this series has ever been, especially on hard mode. I mean, Grace only has a couple of pistols to use for weapons. There's no shotgun, bow gun, or grenade launcher. None of that. And although she does have Leon's Magnum in the form of this so-called Requiem revolver, ammo for this thing is super limited, even by Magnum standards. Now, this is more or less like a get-out-of-jail-free card, or a bit of a clutch when you've got no other options, and to be honest, it does feel like there's moments when they're outright forcing you to use it. It's also probably one of the best hand cannons in the entire series, able to pierce through multiple enemies with a single shot, which means if you got like 2 or 3 in a row, it's gonna take them out all at once. Yeah, and I love the little touch as well that the first time Grace fires it, you can see her holding her hands in pain from the recoil. In comparison to this thing though, the other pistols are about as effective as harsh language, outside of the occasional lucky critical hit where you just turn a zombie's head into mush. Another factor that makes all of this so dangerous is that zombies are now a genuine threat. And even one of them can easily and quickly kill you, to the point that you're outright encouraged to just sneak past them and not even get seen. Also adding in this whole extra stealth element, which the series has never even really done before. Some of them are actually kinda scary to encounter as well. Early on, for instance, you find your way into the kitchen and you see this huge one hacking away at mangled corpses with a giant cleaver, where he soon stops and turns his gaze towards Grace and gives chase. That rhymed. And that's what's kind of neat as well, is how they've incorporated this idea that the zombies still retain some of their human memories, given that the infection's been quite recent. So that means you'll see maid zombies walking around and complaining about the mess that everyone's made, along with there being a zombie that looks like he's just come out of surgery and gets super pissed off from loud noises, highlighting how the guy's still trying to recuperate and rest up despite the infection. Another zombie hates lights being left on, and you can actually bait this guy away from areas by flicking different switches. And it's almost kind of like getting past these things as a puzzle of its own, figuring out the best way to get past them without getting seen. Also kind of reminds me a little bit of the splicers in Bioshock, how you'd hear those guys rambling to themselves off in the distance. Like it was these last shreds of humanity and the fragments of their former personality just slowly eroding away.
I can control myself. I can.
I'd say the creepiest one by far there is a woman you find in the lounge area who was obviously some kind of an entertainer before the outbreak, and she now wanders the halls singing eerily, the kind of stuff that's just nightmare fuel. It's all very Return of the Living Dead, with these definitely being the most human-like zombies I think this series has ever had. And yeah, like proper zombies too. No lust pluggers or parasites or molds or any of that shit. Just a good old-fashioned virus bringing people back from the dead. If you are detected or choose to fight these things head-on, they can take a hell of a lot of punishment before going down. Grace obviously can't suplex or roundhouse kick any of them either, and about all she can do there is just push them over, to either help her escape or leave them open to melee attacks, which, believe me, is not a very effective strategy. Sub-weapons like knives also don't actually prevent you from taking damage anymore either, and even if you push something back with a knife lodged in its skull, it's still going to take a chunk off your health beforehand.
Oh shit.
And even then, like after putting a bunch of bullets between their ears, they're still not truly dead either. Where Resident Evil 9 has a mechanic similar to the Crimson Heads in the Resident Evil remake, where if they're down for long enough and not fully dealt with, eventually they're going to mutate into this super tough variant called Blister Heads and get on up again. Where at that point, the only real effective way to deal with them is a single well-placed shot from the Magnum. Or to prevent this from happening, you can jab them with an item called an injector when they're down, which is kind of like using kerosene on the zombies in that first game, resulting in this super gnarly effect where their entire body just explodes. Kinda like at the end of the first Blade movie, where Wesley Snipes went around jabbing up vampires with syringes. Yeah, does anybody else remember that movie? It's fucking awesome. You can actually do this to any of the other zombies as long as you get up behind them without being detected, which prevents them from reanimating to begin with, considering their entire body is now turned into a fine red mist. This does actually tie into one of the other main new features, where Grace finds a blood collector early on here, and is then able to collect infected blood from different sources and use that blood to craft different items. From things like injectors, health syringes, and ink ribbons, even through to handgun bullets. Though how she's able to turn blood into handgun bullets is anyone's guess. But I mean, look, if we start questioning the realism of mechanics in the Resident Evil series, then we're going to be here all day. It does, if nothing else, encourage lots of exploration though, considering the center's got pools of blood lying all over the place, and stocking up on crucial items is far from the worst strategy to have here. There's even those returning antique coins hidden away that you can spend to unlock upgrades for Grace's inventory and her weapons. Because without that feature of being able to actually improve weapons directly, she can now jab herself up with some kind of injector which improves the damage she does overall. Which, yeah, again, makes sense.
Thank God.
But if nothing else, like all of this definitely does feel like classic Resident Evil. Just you playing as this fragile meat sack wandering around a complete labyrinth, full of all these horrible things that want to eat and kill you. Grace meets this mysterious girl early on here too, called Emily, who's locked away in some kind of a glass cell like a lab rat, and very obviously knows more than she's telling. And the relationship and the bond that eventually forms between these two really does mirror the whole Claire and Sherry dynamic in Resident Evil 2.
There are steps. How about I carry you?
With Grace eventually having to take on a protector / big sister role at some key points. The only thing that is a bit of a letdown here are the puzzles, which I struggle to even call puzzles, seeing as the game is often just going to outright tell you the solution. Most of the stuff, it's really just finding an item and then bringing that item to somewhere else. For instance, there's an office where Grace finds a pencil, and then in the very next room across from it, there's a pad that you can instantly just use the pencil on.
Whoa, slow down, egghead.
And then later on, she'll say she needs to find a lever to use some machinery, walking again into the very next room to find the lever you need on a shelf. And yeah, like, you just kind of have to accept, man, that with these modern Resident Evil titles, the days of actual puzzles, you know what I mean? Like reading notes and using problem solving are just completely gone. And then it's even more polarizing when you're playing as Leon, where it's like an entirely different game all over again, feeling like a combination of RE4 and RE6. Whereas Grace had that traditional health system with the fine, caution, and danger states, Leon's just got that more rudimentary health bar. Now, Leon's stuff usually picks up from wherever Grace left off, exploring the whole center as well, then having to deal with whatever zombies she left behind, where he really does make a mockery of everything you've just spent the last few hours struggling to get past, considering that with his gear, he can make short work of pretty much every threat, even those blister heads. He's able to use his axe for stealth kills, along with getting into warped closets and doors, and it all feels like it's supposed to be a bit of a catharsis for the player. To now be able to play as this dude who's seen this all 100 times, and can just steamroll through everything with little drama. One of the bigger creatures that Grace had to avoid, for instance, is this big, huge, fat asshole resembling your mum, and for Leon, this is one of the first bosses he gets to kill, making it feel even more rewarding. Oh yeah, and I love that little attention to detail as well, how when he reloads a weapon with his flashlight, he's going to tilt his head down so the flashlight doesn't fall off his shoulder.
Cool. Yeah, it is cool.
Just a bit of a shame that these are over so quickly and they only recycle environments that you've already seen. Still though, all of this stuff is classically on Kennedy style gameplay and writing. I mean, with him being in these overwhelming and batshit crazy situations, combined with his whole dry and cynical sense of humor.
Well, that's my cardio for the week.
Breaking the tension with a really mocking tone and saying something that would sound completely stupid if said by anyone else. But when it's coming out of this guy's mouth, you just can't help but laugh.
You know, I do have a question. When's the last time you brushed your teeth?
My only real issue is that it just doesn't really feel like he's advanced all that much since RE4. I mean, they portray him as being this super grizzled, seasoned combat veteran by this point, but then he's still using the same moves that he had 20 years ago. He does carry around a sharpening stone for his hatchet now, which, yeah, is pretty cool, but all that essentially means is that you've just got something else to reload, as opposed to repairing it at a vendor.
I broke my damn hatchet.
And something you'll have to be doing a whole lot here, considering pretty much every single enemy attack can now be parried. Outside of that though, it's just the same old loop of shooting something in the legs or the head until it's stunned, before running up to it to do a melee attack. If you stun an enemy near an object, then there's a chance he's going to use that object for a quick kill, which, yeah, is pretty awesome, but it's also something we've already seen in RE6. Another new thing is that you can pick up certain weapons and throw them at nearby zombies, which is again, something from Resident Evil 6. And that is actually, I think, a valid point of comparison. You know, even though I'm not too sure if that's still even canon by this point, but that game was a perfect example of how much Leon's skills should have been progressed over time. I mean, in that game, you could dive in more or less any direction, firing weapons while you were still on the ground, and even shooting in the middle of the dive itself. If you crouched during a sprint, you could slide, knocking enemies back, and you could also quick fire, foregoing accuracy for the benefit of a faster shot to deal with something at close range. Not to mention being able to dual wield certain weapons. I mean, even just his basic melee moveset was improved as well, all of which felt like a sensible and believable progression for a guy who'd been doing this kind of thing day in and day out for the past 10 or so years. And although there are some very well-deserved criticisms in regards to Resident Evil 6, I mean, I don't think that anyone can deny that the movement and shooting was not one of them. So now compare that to how he is here in Resident Evil 9, where it's mostly just the same shit we did back in 2023. Parry an enemy attack when you can, shoot them in the head, and then just pull off a melee attack when the right prompt comes up. Oh yeah, and I can't even imagine trying to play through some of these sections with a controller, man, because the way that the enemies now shamble and shuffle around is hard enough to hit with a mouse, let alone a thumbstick. And I noticed as well that for some reason, there's not even the option to change the mouse sensitivity, along with the FOV.
Right.
At the end of the day though, I hardly think anyone's going to be disappointed when they get to play as Leon. To be honest, I think the real thing's going to be how people react to Grace.
Meanwhile...
Oh yeah, and I don't know if this is just me here, but when she's running around a lot, the kind of sound she makes, which I assume is supposed to be from fatigue, I can't help but hear something else entirely. Is it just me? It's just me, right? Right?
I know what kind of man you are.
The big thing we need to talk about though is the second half of the campaign. And yeah, I don't think it's any secret by this point that you do return to Raccoon City. I mean, Capcom themselves made it abundantly clear that that was the case in all of the marketing leading up to the game's release. Due to the embargo though, they prevented people from really talking about this stuff before launch, probably as a way of trying to hide some of the spoilers, which is why I held off on releasing this video, as it is absolutely something that needs to be talked about, considering it pretty much takes up the second half of the entire campaign, and it is so vastly different to that first chunk as Grace. Yeah, so like without really spoiling all that much, a few things happen around the halfway mark, and then for different reasons, you get to play as Leon for the next 5 or 6 hours. Returning to Raccoon City, or what remains of it, for the first time since that initial outbreak back in 1998.
Got it, thanks.
And don't get me wrong, there's some pretty damn cool moments here where we get some awesome little throwbacks and references. In fact, I think the sequence when he steps through the doors of the RPD again is an amazing moment, and it genuinely gave me goosebumps. Plus, it actually deals and addresses Leon's trauma, because in between all the suplexes and sarcastic quips, I think a lot of us seem to forget that this dude went through absolute hell at a really young age as well. I mean, the amount of PTSD he must have from that 98 incident alone would just be crushing, and the voice acting from Nick Apostolides in some of these key cinematics really sells that.
Raccoon City was where it all began for me. When it all happened, I couldn't make a difference.
His subtle facial twitches wouldn't be noticed by the layman, but to me, he might as well have been sobbing.
The only other cinematic in an RE game I remember really moving me was that one in RE2 when Leon runs into Kendo in the gun shop, which ironically is also the exact same moment that arguably set up Leon's whole hero arc.
I want to find out what's happening here and stop whoever's behind it. Helping people like them? That's why I joined the Force.
So on the one hand, you've got that stuff, which is great, but then on the other hand, you've just got all these blatant member berries. The surface level appearance of certain characters and enemies, but done in a way that just feels like it's been done for the sake of it. And it stands out even more because outside of maybe Resident Evil 6, again, fuck, bringing up that game, I don't think we've ever had an entry that has had this many throwbacks. And I guess that's fine, you know, if you're the kind of person who clapped every time Darth Vader was mentioned in whatever Star Wars spin-off series you're currently watching.
Remember? Hey, remember Ghostbusters? Oh, I remember.
And it's kind of like, is it cool? Yes, it is, on face value. Does it fully make sense? Not really. Outside of that stuff though, it is worth mentioning how from this point on, it's like an entirely different game. And all of that survival horror stuff is practically gone, because despite still playing on the so-called classic difficulty mode, that whole ink ribbon and manual save system is now just completely redundant, because Leon gets checkpoints every 2 minutes. Even the item box is gone as well, with Leon now just able to carry every single weapon at once. The goal at first here is to find these components to blow up a gate so he can make his way through the city, but doing that requires finding 3 items to repair it, all tucked away in different sections of what really is this one very large open map to explore. You might also be back in Raccoon City, which is to Resident Evil what the Mushroom Kingdom is to the Mario games, but for some reason this is all set during the daytime, completely removing the horror aspect. Visually, it reminded me a whole lot of The Last of Us, where you're just moving through all of these ruined streets and buildings in the middle of the day. I mean, you got stuff here where you're moving through flooded tunnels, crouch walking around and sneaking up behind zombies for a melee takedown. Your weapon lineup is a pistol, shotgun, and a bolt-action rifle. Yeah, sound familiar? Then there's this whole feature they've added into where Leon's able to earn points from killing zombies using some kind of an old BSAA ranking system that he comes across at a camp, and then turning these points in at terminals to buy new guns and upgrade his existing weapons. Meaning you're constantly seeing points pop up on the side of the screen as you're killing things, like it's the Mercenaries mode or something. All of the personality and the uniqueness to the zombies is now completely gone as well, just replaced with your standard rotting, shambling walkers, really devoid of any character. I mean, there are former BSAA zombies here as well, which can fire guns and even mortars, because apparently Capcom didn't learn their lesson back with RE6. But they're still just cannon fodder for a guy who's long since lost count of how many of these things he's had to deal with. I mean, for Leon, this is Tuesday.
It was Tuesday.
The other thing I want to ask is just how the fuck are these zombies somehow more resilient and advanced than the others? I mean, technically these ones would have been some of the oldest zombies created from the T-virus, right? Having been infected at what's more or less ground zero. And yet despite being barely bone and sinew, they seem to absorb the most damage, and can also pick up and wield things like concrete rebar. Yeah, and don't ever get me started on the ones laying dormant on the ground that suddenly have this extreme burst of energy and can zip across a room to grab you. I'm really kind of treading on eggshells here as well because I really don't want to spoil any major moments, but I do at least want to say that I do think the ending is pretty good, even if Capcom couldn't help themselves and again had to leave the whole thing open-ended.
Can't have that, can we?
Because despite this thing taking its namesake from something intended for funerals, it's very clear that they have no intention of finishing this series up. Not yet. But I will say though that if you're expecting this to get the band back together or have some kind of awesome scene where a returning character pops out of nowhere to save the day, well, don't hold your breath. For that kind of feeling, you're gonna want to go and play Resident Evil 6, and oh my god man, again, I'm bringing up RE6.
Chris? Leon!
But really, that's what the whole thing feels like to me, man. I mean, RE6 was kind of unfocused and did kill off the franchise for a bit there, until Resident Evil 7 came and rebooted interest in it by making things feel fresh again. I'm not trying to say it's a bad game because, let's be honest, it's far from it, but to go from some of the sequences where we played as Grace to some of the fucking insanity that Leon goes through in that second half is really about as juxtaposed as it could possibly get. And I guess whether or not you enjoy that stuff overall comes down to whether or not you're willing to accept some pretty severe tonal whiplash.
So much for the direct route.
All up, getting through the story for my first playthrough on hard mode took me about 13 hours, give or take. Although in-game it did say it was closer to 9, but that's not really accounting for deaths and retries. Finishing it for the first time unlocks Insanity difficulty, which, yeah, is true to its namesake, being this incredibly hard mode where, even from the prologue, zombies are noticeably tougher. There's not really any new game plus mode here either, in the sense that you can't really carry over upgraded weapons into subsequent playthroughs like in previous games. However, Leon does have that BSAA point system thing from the get-go, and can purchase and upgrade weapons frequently after kills. So I guess the idea is that you buy and upgrade things on the go to help you along. But even still, like, this mode is the real fucking deal, and on a surface level seems like it has the potential to be one of the hardest difficulty modes in the whole series. Completing challenges throughout the game also lets you unlock bonus content and all that crap, and there are those other conditions for beating the campaign which does encourage multiple playthroughs. But to be honest, I just didn't really feel like it.
Damn it.
I mean, with the last 4 or 5 Resident Evil games we've had back to the RE2 remake, I'm pretty sure I finished all of them at least once, and then more or less went immediately back in again and beat them on the highest difficulty mode, if not then a second or third time after that.
Starting to go a little stale.
Here with Requiem though, I just really had no desire to.
Yeah, sure, right.
In fact, I didn't even end up finishing my second playthrough. I got about 2/3 of the way into it and then I just kinda got over it. We're definitely getting to a point again with this franchise where it does seem like the ideas, well, is starting to get tapped pretty dry. And Leon's definitely going to have some lower back issues after this one from having to carry the entire series. And I just hope for the inevitable Resident Evil 10 that they can find a way to make things feel fresh again.
Well, that's my cardio for the week.